He invited her to humiliate her at the wedding, but when she walked in, no one was prepared for what happened next. Alex leaned back in his office chair, the sound of the bustling city faint in the background. He held the gold-trimmed wedding invitation in his hands, flipping it between his fingers. "Send one to her," he said, his tone sharp. His assistant, Sarah, hesitated. "To whom?" "Luisa Morales. You'll find her name in my old school records. Make sure she gets it." He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "I want her there." Sarah nodded and left, her confusion evident but unspoken. Alone, Alex's lips curled into a smirk. The memory of his teenage years at Lincoln High flashed through his mind. The shy girl who wore secondhand clothes and carried herself with unearned confidence. She had dared to break up with him when he thought he owned the world. "Let's see how you've turned out," he muttered. Across town, Luisa set down her coffee cup, startled by the knock on her apartment door. She wiped her hands on her jeans and opened it to find a courier holding a pristine envelope. "Luisa Morales?" he asked. "Yes," she replied cautiously. The courier handed her the envelope and left without another word. Luisa closed the door and sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the gilded lettering spelling out Alexander Whitmore and Laura Preston's wedding. Her heart skipped. She hadn't heard that name in over a decade. Flipping the envelope open, her eyes scanned the invitation. The event was set in one of the city's most exclusive venues. She frowned, confusion mingling with unease. Why would Alex invite her to his wedding? Their breakup had been anything but amicable, and their lives had veered in entirely different directions. She dropped the card onto the table. Her first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity lingered. The last she'd heard of Alex, he was climbing the corporate ladder, amassing wealth and power. She, on the other hand, had worked tirelessly to build her career in social work, finding fulfillment in helping others despite her modest lifestyle. The next day, Luisa confided in her friend Rachel over lunch. "I got this," she said, sliding the invitation across the table. "From Alex Whitmore." Rachel's eyes widened. "Alex? The Alex? What does he want with you?" "I have no idea," Luisa said, her voice flat. "It's probably some power move. Maybe he wants to show me how far he's come." Rachel leaned closer. "So, what are you going to do?" Luisa hesitated. "I'm thinking about going." "You're joking?" "Not really. If he's expecting to humiliate me, he's in for a surprise. I'm not the same person he knew in high school." Rachel nodded slowly. "Just be careful. People like him don't change. He'll use any weakness he can find." Luisa's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm not afraid of Alex Whitmore." The chapter closed with Luisa setting the invitation on her bookshelf, a quiet resolve settling over her. Alex's game had begun, but Luisa wasn't stepping into it unprepared. Alex walked into the grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate, watching as the decorators fussed over every detail for his wedding. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, and rows of pristine, white chairs lined the room. Everything screamed perfection, a testament to his success. Yet his mind wasn't on the wedding. "Sir, should I approve the floral arrangements?" Sarah, his assistant, asked, holding a clipboard. Alex waved her off absent-mindedly. "Do whatever Laura wants." His thoughts were fixated on Luisa. The mere idea of her stepping into this world, his world, stirred something he couldn't quite place. Was it satisfaction, anticipation, or something closer to dread? He pulled out his phone and scrolled through social media. Luisa Morales. Her profile was private, but her picture showed a confident woman with sharp eyes and a poised smile. Gone was the shy girl from high school who clung to oversized sweaters. A pang of something? Envy? Regret? He quickly pushed the thought aside. "Sir?" Sarah's voice cut through his reverie. "What is it?" he snapped. "Miss Preston is here," she said, her tone cautious. Laura entered the room, radiating elegance in a tailored suit. "Alex," she greeted with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything looks wonderful. The press is going to eat this up." "That's the idea," Alex replied, forcing a smile. Laura stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You've been distracted lately. Something I should know?" Alex stiffened. "Just work. Everything's under control." Her gaze lingered for a moment before she nodded. "Good. Because this needs to be flawless." As Laura walked away, Alex felt the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. For all the grandeur surrounding him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wedding was less about love and more about appearances. Meanwhile, across town, Louisa sat at her modest desk, papers spread out in front of her. The chatter of her co-workers filled the small office space, but her focus was elsewhere. The invitation rested on the edge of her desk, like a taunt. She'd spent years putting Alex Whitmore behind her, but now he was back, pulling her into his orbit. "You okay, Louisa?" asked Marco, her closest friend at work. "Yeah," she lied, forcing a smile. Marco glanced at the invitation. "Is that what's bothering you?" "It's nothing," she replied, pushing it aside. "Nothing doesn't look like that," he teased, but his tone was gentle. "You don't have to go, you know." Louisa exhaled. "I know, but part of me wants to. Not for him, but for me." Marco nodded, his expression softening. "Then do it. But remember, you don't owe him anything." That night, Louisa stared at her reflection in the mirror. Memories of high school flooded her mind. Alex's charm, his arrogance, and the sting of being discarded when she no longer fit his image. She had vowed never to let anyone make her feel small again. "This isn't about him," she whispered to herself. "It's about showing up for the person I've become." Her phone buzzed, a message from Rachel. "You've got this." With a determined breath, Louisa set the invitation on her nightstand. The date was set, and this time, she would be walking into Alex's world on her own terms. The days leading up to the wedding blurred together for Alex. Every moment seemed packed with decisions that felt increasingly trivial. Yet, no matter how he busied himself, his mind always drifted back to Louisa. Seated in his study one evening, Alex poured himself a glass of scotch and stared out at the city skyline. His fiancée, Laura, had excused herself early, claiming exhaustion from the final dress fitting. He welcomed the silence, though it did little to quiet his thoughts. The invitation, her face, that confident smile. What was he hoping to prove? A sharp knock interrupted his musings. Without waiting for a reply, Laura entered, her expression unreadable. She closed the door behind her and folded her arms. "Alex, we need to talk," she said. He gestured to the chair across from him, but Laura remained standing. "I've noticed you've been distant, distracted, and I'm not sure why." Alex sighed and leaned back in his chair. "It's nothing. Just work, as I've told you." "Don't insult me," Laura snapped, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. "You think I don't notice when you're not here? When your mind is miles away?" Alex's jaw tightened. "I'm handling everything, Laura. The wedding is perfect. The media will be there. The investors you wanted to impress will attend. What more do you want? I want you to be honest with me." She shot back. "Who is Luisa Morales?" Her words hit like a blow. For a moment, Alex was silent, his grip tightening around the glass in his hand. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked carefully. Laura raised an eyebrow. "It doesn't matter. What matters is why she's on the guest list." "She's no one," Alex said, his tone clipped. "An old acquaintance. That's all." "Don't lie to me," Laura said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. "I know she means something to you. The question is why." Alex set the glass down with a loud clink. "It's nothing, Laura. Let it go." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't push further. She turned and walked to the door, pausing before leaving. "Be careful, Alex. Whatever game you're playing, make sure it doesn't cost you everything." As the door closed behind her, Alex ran a hand through his hair and exhaled sharply. Laura's words lingered, a warning he couldn't ignore. Across town, Louisa stood in front of her closet, pulling out dresses she hadn't worn in years. She turned to Rachel, who was perched on the bed, scrolling through her phone. "This one?" Louisa asked, holding up a simple navy dress. Rachel glanced up. "It's nice, but maybe something with a little more wow factor." Louisa rolled her eyes. "I'm not trying to steal the show. Just show up, say my polite hellos, and leave. Still, you don't want to look like you're attending a job interview," Rachel teased. "How about this one?" She pointed to a sleek black dress at the back of the closet. Louisa hesitated before pulling it out. "I forgot I even had this." "It's perfect," Rachel said. "Confident, elegant, and just the right amount of bold. Trust me, you'll walk in there, and they won't know what hit them." Louisa laughed, shaking her head. I'm not going there to make a statement. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Maybe not, but that doesn't mean you can't leave them speechless. As Louisa held the dress against herself, a small smile formed. For the first time, she felt ready, not for Alex, but for herself. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, the city alive with the hum of anticipation. For Alex, it began with a sense of unease that he couldn't shake. Every polished detail of the event had been meticulously planned, yet his thoughts were consumed by Luis's impending arrival. He sat alone in his dressing room, the tailored tuxedo feeling heavier than it should. Are you ready? Sarah's voice called through the door. I'll be out in a minute, Alex replied, his tone sharper than he intended. He adjusted his cufflinks, staring at his reflection in the mirror. What are you trying to prove? He muttered to himself. Shaking his head, he straightened his tie and stepped out, forcing a confident stride. Meanwhile, Louisa stood at the base of the Whitmore Estate's grand staircase, taking in the scene. The venue was breathtaking, a world apart from anything she'd ever known. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits moved like a well-choreographed dance, their laughter and chatter blending with the soft notes of a string quartet. This is it, she murmured, drawing a steadying breath. Rachel, standing beside her, squeezed her arm. You've got this. Just remember, you're here for you, not for him. Louisa nodded, her resolve firm. Clad in the sleek black dress, she stepped into the throng, her presence commanding attention despite her quiet entrance. Heads turned as she moved gracefully through the room, a stark contrast to the girl many of these same faces had dismissed years ago. From across the room, Alex caught sight of her. His breath hitched, and for a moment, the chatter around him faded into nothing. She was radiant, composed, and every bit as striking as the memories he'd tried to suppress. But there was no shyness in her now, just an aura of quiet strength. Laura, ever attuned to Alex's moods, noticed the change in his demeanor. Following his gaze, her eyes landed on Louisa. Her expression hardened, but she said nothing, choosing instead to link her arm with his and pull him deeper in a conversation with a group of investors. Louisa, oblivious to Alex's reaction, focused on the task at hand. She exchanged polite greetings with a few familiar faces from their high school days, noting the curiosity in their eyes. Most of them had never bothered to know her then, and their surprised smiles only fueled her determination to stay composed. As she reached the refreshment table, she felt a presence beside her. Turning, she met Alex's gaze. The air between them grew taut, the weight of unspoken words heavy. Louisa, he said, his voice low. Alex, she replied, her tone cool but civil. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the buzz of the room fading into the background. Finally, Alex broke the silence. You came? I did, Louisa said simply. Her eyes held his, unwavering. Congratulations on the wedding. The formality of her words stung more than he expected. Thank you. You look stunning. Louisa offered a faint smile. I'm not here to make an impression, Alex. Just to pay my respects. His brow furrowed, but before he could respond, Laura appeared at his side. Alex, darling, the ceremony is about to begin, she said, her voice sweet but firm. Her gaze flickered to Louisa, sizing her up in an instant. Of course, Alex replied, his jaw tightening. He hesitated before adding, we'll catch up later. Louisa nodded, watching as he and Laura walked away. Her chest tightened, but she steadied herself, refusing to let the moment shake her. This wasn't about Alex or the past. It was about her ability to stand tall, no matter the circumstances. As she took her seat for the ceremony, Louisa's gaze swept over the opulence around her. She had walked into Alex Whitmore's world and held her ground. Now, she would see how the rest of the day unfolded. The ceremony began with a flourish of strings and whispers of admiration from the guests. Laura glided down the aisle, the picture of elegance, her smile calculated for the cameras. Alex stood at the altar, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the crowd. Despite himself, they landed on Louisa more than once. Louisa sat among the other guests, her face impassive. She was determined to remain composed, but the tension was palpable. Every word from the officiant seemed to echo in her mind, a stark reminder of the stark contrast between her world and Alex's. As the vows were exchanged, Luisa's thoughts drifted. She remembered the Alex she once knew, charming, reckless, and full of ambition. The man standing before her now seemed like a stranger. His every movement was calculated, every word spoken for the benefit of the audience around him. When the ceremony ended, applause erupted. Laura and Alex made their way back down the aisle, accepting congratulations and well wishes. As they approached the reception area, Alex's gaze locked on Luisa once more. It was a fleeting moment, but it left a mark. The reception was a spectacle of grandeur, with crystal chandeliers casting golden light over the ballroom and tables adorned with lavish centerpieces. Luisa moved through the crowd, navigating polite conversations and half-hearted pleasantries. She felt like an outsider, yet her quiet strength kept her grounded. "Luisa, is that really you?" a familiar voice called out. She turned to see Amanda, one of their old high school classmates, approaching with a look of astonishment. "It's been a while, Amanda," Luisa said, offering a polite smile. Amanda's gaze flickered over Luisa's dress, her surprise quickly replaced by a hint of envy. "You look amazing. I almost didn't recognize you. What have you been up to?" "Just working, keeping busy," Luisa replied, keeping her answers vague. She had no intention of turning this into a reunion. Before Amanda could pry further, Alex appeared beside them. "Excuse me, Amanda. Mind if I steal Luisa for a moment?" Amanda's eyes widened slightly before she stepped away, leaving Luisa and Alex alone. He gestured toward a quieter corner of the room. "Walk with me?" Luisa hesitated, then nodded. They moved through the throng, their path drawing subtle glances from nearby guests. Once they reached the corner, Alex turned to face her. "You've certainly made an impression," he said, his tone carrying an edge of something she couldn't quite place. "That wasn't my intention," she replied evenly. Alex exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Why did you come?" "You invited me," Luisa said simply. "Why did you invite me?" He paused, the question clearly throwing him off balance. I wanted to see you, to know how you've been, after all these years?" Luisa asked, her voice calm but firm. "Let's not pretend this is just a casual reunion." Alex's expression shifted, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "Maybe I wanted to remind myself of something. Or someone. You wanted to prove something," Luisa said, her words cutting through the layers of his composure. "To me? To yourself? I don't know. But whatever it is, Alex, it's not my responsibility to fulfill it." Her words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. For a moment, Alex was silent, his gaze fixed on her with a mixture of admiration and unease. Before he could respond, Laura's voice called out from across the room. "Alex, darling, the photographer is waiting." He straightened, his mask slipping back into place. "Enjoy the rest of the evening," he said, his tone polite but distant. Luisa watched as he walked away, his stride confident but his shoulders tense. Turning back to the room, she felt an odd sense of closure begin to form. She wasn't here to relive the past. She was here to affirm her own strength and to let go. As the night unfolded, Luisa found herself standing a little taller, her heart a little lighter. This wasn't Alex Whitmore's world anymore. It was hers. The reception reached its crescendo, the band playing a lively tune as guests filled the dance floor. Laughter and clinking glasses reverberated throughout the grand ballroom. Yet, Luisa found herself on the fringes, nursing a glass of sparkling water and observing the spectacle from a quiet corner. Alex moved through the crowd like a practiced host, smiling, shaking hands, and exchanging pleasantries. To anyone watching, he appeared the epitome of charm and confidence. But Luisa saw through the facade. His earlier hesitation and vulnerability lingered in her mind, leaving her unsettled. "You look like you could use some air," Rachel's voice broke through her thoughts. She had returned from mingling with other guests, her usual cheerfulness now tempered by concern. Luisa nodded, grateful for the suggestion. Together, they stepped onto the terrace, where the crisp night air provided a welcome relief from the opulent chaos inside. The city skyline stretched before them, its lights twinkling like distant stars. "So," Rachel began, leaning on the railing, "how are you holding up?" Louisa sighed. "I don't know. It's like being in a movie I didn't audition for. Everything feels surreal." Rachel studied her friend's face. "He still has a hold on you, doesn't he?" "Not in the way you think," Louisa replied, her voice firm. "It's not about feelings. It's about closure. Finally understanding who he is and why he's always had this power over people." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "Well, from where I'm standing, you're the one with the power now. Don't forget that." Before Louisa could respond, the sound of footsteps drew their attention. Alex emerged from the ballroom, his expression unreadable as his eyes landed on her. Rachel glanced between them, sensing the tension. "I'll leave you too," she said, offering Louisa a supportive smile before slipping back inside. Alex stepped closer, his hands in his pockets. "Needed a break from the crowd?" "Something like that," Louisa replied, her tone neutral. He leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the city below. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence filled only by the distant hum of traffic. "You've changed," Alex said finally. "But then again, so have I." Louisa's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Change is inevitable. Whether it's for better or worse is up to us." Alex turned to her, his expression softening. "I wasn't lying earlier. I didn't want to see you, to know how you've been. But I think I also wanted to know if you've forgiven me." The honesty in his words caught her off guard. She searched his face for signs of manipulation, but found none. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for, Alex. It's something you earn." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "You're right, and maybe that's why I've always felt unfinished. Like I've been chasing something I can't name." "What you're chasing can't come from me," Louisa said gently. "It has to come from you." Alex's gaze dropped to the ground, his confidence visibly faltering. "I've made so many mistakes, Louisa. Hurt people I never meant to hurt. But seeing you here tonight, it's made me realize I need to start making things right. Not just with you, but with myself." Louisa felt a pang of unexpected sympathy. For all his flaws, Alex's vulnerability in this moment felt genuine. "Then start," she said simply. "But don't do it for me. Do it because it's the right thing to do." They stood in silence once more, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them. Finally, Alex straightened, his resolve hardening. "Thank you, Louisa," he said, "for being here, for being honest." She nodded, watching as he turned and walked back inside. As the door closed behind him, Louisa breathed deeply, a sense of relief washing over her. She had faced him, spoken her truth, and reclaimed her power. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Inside the grand ballroom, the mood was jubilant, with guests toasting to Alex and Laura's future. The band played an upbeat tune, and the dance floor was packed. Yet, despite the outward celebration, Alex felt the weight of his conversation with Louisa pressing on him. As he returned to Laura's side, she immediately picked up on his distracted demeanor. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice light but edged with suspicion. "Just getting some air," Alex replied, avoiding her gaze. Laura's eyes narrowed slightly, but she smiled for the benefit of the nearby guests. "Let's focus on our night, shall we?" she said, looping her arm through his and guiding him toward the center of the room. The first dance began, a choreographed display of elegance and poise. The room erupted in applause as Alex spun Laura effortlessly, but his mind was elsewhere. Flashes of his conversation with Louisa replayed in his head, her words striking deeper than he expected. Meanwhile, Louisa watched from her table, her expression unreadable. Rachel leaned in. "He's still looking at you." Louisa's lips tightened. "That's his problem, not mine." Rachel smirked. "You've got him rattled, and he knows it." "It's not about rattling him," Louisa replied. "It's about finally being free of whatever hold he used to have on me." Across the room, Laura's smile faltered as she noticed Alex's attention drifting. Following his gaze, her eyes landed on Louisa. Her jaw tightened, but she quickly recovered, masking her irritation. When the dance ended, she pulled Alex aside. "What's going on with you?" she hissed, her tone low but firm. "You've been distant all night, and I know it's not work." "Is it her?" Alex stiffened. Laura, this is our wedding. Can we not do this right now? No, she snapped. I need to know. Did you invite her just to ruin this? Of course not, Alex said, his voice rising slightly. I invited her because I needed to. Laura's eyes narrowed. Needed to? For what? To prove something to her? Or to yourself? The accusation hung in the air, and Alex couldn't find the words to deny it. Laura scoffed, stepping back. Unbelievable, she muttered, turning on her heel and walking away. For a moment, Alex stood frozen, the weight of the evening crashing down on him. His carefully constructed world felt like it was beginning to crack, exposing the emptiness beneath the surface. Louisa, unaware of the confrontation, stepped outside again to escape the noise. She leaned against the railing, the cool night air calming her nerves. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of closure. Alex's struggles were no longer hers to bear. Mind if I join you? A voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see Amanda, a glass of champagne in hand. Of course, Louisa said, shifting slightly to make room. Amanda studied her for a moment. I have to admit, you've surprised everyone tonight, including Alex. Louisa raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Amanda nodded, taking a sip of her drink. You're not the same girl from high school. You've grown into someone who doesn't need his approval. And trust me, that's driving him crazy. Louisa chuckled softly. I'm not here to drive anyone crazy. I'm here for myself. Amanda's expression softened. Well, whatever your reason, it's working. You've reminded all of us, including Alex, that some people don't need to chase validation. They create it for themselves. As Amanda walked back inside, Louisa stayed on the terrace, her gaze fixed on the horizon. For the first time, she felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a quiet strength she had earned through years of perseverance. Inside, Alex lingered near the bar, staring into his untouched drink. Laura's words echoed in his mind, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth he had avoided for so long. Louisa's presence had exposed the cracks in his carefully curated life, and now he had no choice but to face them. The night began to unravel as tensions simmered beneath the surface. Guests continued to celebrate, blissfully unaware of the turmoil brewing among the key players of the evening. Louisa stayed on the terrace longer than she had intended, savoring the quiet and the freedom it offered. Inside, Alex paced near the bar, his drink still untouched. Laura's words gnawed at him, her accusations hitting closer to home than he cared to admit. He had spent years crafting a life that screamed success, yet the emptiness that filled him now was deafening. Every glance in Louisa's direction felt like a reminder of the parts of himself he had buried. Laura, meanwhile, had retreated to a private corner with her closest confidant, Claire. He's ruining this night for me, Laura hissed, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. All because of that woman. Claire tried to console her. It's just nerves, Laura. Weddings are stressful. It's not nerves, Laura snapped. It's her. He invited her for a reason, and I'm starting to think it wasn't just to show off. Claire hesitated, unsure of how to respond. What do you want to do? Laura's expression hardened. I want to remind him who he's marrying. On the terrace, Louisa turned to head back inside, her thoughts focused on making a graceful exit. But as she stepped through the doors, she found herself face to face with Alex. He looked as conflicted as she felt, his polished exterior faltering for just a moment. Louisa, he began, his voice strained. Can we talk? She hesitated, glancing around to ensure they weren't drawing attention. Alex, I think we've said everything that needed to be said. Maybe you have, he replied, his tone quiet but urgent. But I haven't. Reluctantly, Louisa followed him to a quieter corner of the ballroom. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized from years ago. It was something he did when he was struggling to find the right words. I've been lying to myself for a long time, Alex admitted, his voice low. About what I want, about who I am. And seeing you tonight, it's forced me to confront things I've been avoiding. Louisa's expression remained calm, though her chest tightened. Alex, whatever you're trying to say, this isn't the time or place. You're getting married. That's just it, he said, his frustration breaking through. I've been so focused on what looks right, what sounds right, that I've ignored what feels right. And now I'm standing here, wondering if I've made the biggest mistake of my life." The weight of his words hung between them. Louisa took a steadying breath, her voice steady but firm. "Alex, your choices are your own, but don't drag me into your regrets. You made your decision a long time ago. Live with it." Before he could respond, Laura appeared, her expression icy. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of a few nearby guests. "Nothing," Louisa said quickly, stepping back. "I was just leaving." "No, you weren't," Laura snapped, her gaze fixed on Alex. "Tell me the truth. Why did you invite her here?" The room seemed to still as the tension between the three of them reached its breaking point. Alex looked between Laura and Louisa, his usually confident demeanor crumbling. "Laura," he began, his voice faltering. "I invited her because I needed to see if I'd moved on. If I was ready to start this new chapter with you." Laura's eyes widened in shock, her voice trembling with anger. "And did you get your answer?" Alex hesitated, and in that moment, Laura's expression shifted from fury to devastation. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Alex standing there, exposed and uncertain. Louisa watched the scene unfold, her emotions a whirlwind. She wanted to feel vindicated, but all she felt was exhaustion. Without a word, she turned and walked away, leaving Alex alone to face the consequences of his choices. The silence after Laura's departure was deafening. Alex remained rooted in place, his mind racing. The weight of his own actions pressed down on him, heavier than the disapproving stares of the guests who had witnessed the confrontation. He had built a life that appeared perfect on the outside, but was crumbling from within. Louisa walked briskly through the corridors of the estate, her heart pounding. She hadn't asked to be part of this drama, yet somehow she had become its focal point. All she wanted was to leave and never look back. Rachel intercepted her at the entrance. "What happened?" Rachel asked, her concern evident. "Everything I hoped to avoid," Louisa replied, her voice tight. "I need to go." Rachel hesitated. "Do you want me to come with you?" Louisa shook her head. "No, I need some time alone." She stepped out into the night, the cool air hitting her like a wake-up call. As she made her way to her car, her mind raced. She had thought she'd left Alex and everything he represented behind, but tonight had dredged up emotions she hadn't expected to feel again. Not anger, but pity, and perhaps even a sliver of regret. Inside, the party struggled to maintain its veneer of celebration. Laura had locked herself in a private room, her sobs muffled but audible to Claire, who stood outside, unsure whether to intervene. Guests whispered among themselves, the earlier joyous atmosphere now tinged with unease. Alex eventually retreated to the estate's library, seeking solace among the towering shelves of books he rarely touched. He poured himself a drink, his hands trembling. For the first time in years, he felt exposed, vulnerable. The mask he wore so effortlessly had slipped, and he wasn't sure he could put it back on. The sound of footsteps drew his attention. He looked up to see Laura standing in the doorway, her eyes red but her posture unyielding. "Is this what you wanted?" she demanded, her voice low but filled with venom. "To ruin everything we've built?" Alex set his drink down, his expression weary. "No, that's not what I wanted." "Then what was the point?" she pressed, stepping closer. "Why did you invite her? Why couldn't you just let the past stay buried?" "Because it wasn't buried," Alex admitted, his voice breaking. "It's been there all along, festering. And if I didn't face it, it was going to destroy me, destroy us." Laura stared at him, her anger giving way to something more complex. "So what now, Alex? Do you think admitting this makes it better? That it fixes what you've broken tonight?" He met her gaze, his eyes filled with a desperation she hadn't seen before. "I don't know, but I know I can't keep living like this, pretending I've got everything under control when I don't." Laura exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. "You're a coward, Alex. You think facing your past gives you some kind of redemption, but all you've done is hurt everyone around you." Her words cut deep, but Alex didn't argue. He simply nodded. "You're right." Laura's eyes widened, unprepared for his agreement. She turned and left without another word, leaving Alex alone in the vast, empty library. Outside, Louisa sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She stared straight ahead, the weight of the evening settling over her. She had confronted Alex, faced the ghosts of her past, and yet the sense of closure she had hoped for still eluded her. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "Are you okay?" Louisa typed back, "I will be." As she drove away from the Whitmore estate, the city lights stretched before her, a reminder that life moved on. And so would she. Days had passed since the wedding, but the events of the night still lingered in Alex's mind. The estate had grown quiet, the grandeur of the celebration now replaced by an oppressive silence. Laura had left the next morning, her parting words a cold declaration. "Fix yourself before you try to fix anything else." Sitting in his now empty office, Alex stared at the engagement ring he had meant to give her. It no longer represented a future, but a stark reminder of the choices that had led him to this moment. He placed the ring in a drawer and stood, his reflection in the glass window, showing a man he barely recognized. Across town, Louisa was busy packing boxes in her small apartment. The confrontation at the wedding had been the final push she needed to take control of her own narrative. She had accepted a new position in a different city, a fresh start, far away from the shadows of her past. Rachel helped her tape up the last of the boxes. "I still can't believe you're leaving. This city won't be the same without you." Louisa smiled softly. "It's time. There's nothing left for me here, except maybe a certain someone who still has a lot to figure out," Rachel teased, though her tone was gentle. "Alex's problems aren't mine to solve," Louisa replied firmly. "He has his own path to walk, and I have mine. I can't keep waiting for someone else to change to feel complete." Rachel nodded, respecting her friend's resolve. "You're stronger than you know, Louisa." Later that evening, as Louisa loaded the last of her belongings into her car, she paused to take in the city skyline one last time. It had been the backdrop to her struggles and her triumphs, but now it was time to let it go. Meanwhile, Alex found himself at the park where he and Louisa used to meet during their high school days. He sat on a bench, his thoughts circling back to the moments that had shaped their relationship. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. "Louisa, I know I can't change the past, but I wanted to thank you for coming, for being honest, and for showing me the parts of myself I've been too afraid to face. I hope you find the happiness you deserve." Alex, he stared at the words before hitting send. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness or a bid to rekindle anything. It was simply the truth, the first step in a long journey toward becoming the man he wanted to be. The next morning, Louisa received the message as she stopped for coffee on her way out of town. She read it twice, her emotions a mix of relief and closure. Smiling faintly, she typed a short reply. "Thank you, Alex. Take care of yourself." As she drove toward her new beginning, the weight she had carried for years began to lift. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it on her own terms. Back at the estate, Alex walked out onto the balcony, the early morning sun casting a warm glow over the city. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't about winning someone back or proving anything to anyone. It was about rediscovering who he was and who he could be. And as both Alex and Louisa moved forward, their lives no longer intertwined. They carried with them the lessons of the past. A reminder that growth often comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes, the greatest victories are not about reclaiming the past, but about embracing the future with courage and grace. Alex and Louisa's journey reminds us that true strength lies in letting go, learning, and growing from even the most painful moments. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share it with someone who needs a little hope. Like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel to uncover more stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul. Together, let's keep spreading light and transformation, one story at a time.